Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. Now today's video is going to be my January wrap up. Now if you haven't noticed, my nose is very congested and I'm feeling like crap, but we're already way into February now, so I really want to get my wrap up done. I have a Lemsip on standby for when I need it, but without further ado, let's just get straight stuck into my January wrap up video. So, the first book that I want to talk about that I read in the month of January was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I know that this is a very controversial story. I know a lot of people just cannot stomach the storyline. So for those of you that don't know what the story is about, this story is about a 38-year-old, I believe, man who has desire and fantasies about young girls that he calls nymphets, which are between the ages of 12 and I think 17, who he says are different than normal girls of that age because they have this kind of sexuality or awareness of sexuality that the others don't. And he said they don't necessarily have to be the most beautiful out of their year group, but they have this secret knowledge of their own sexuality, which for a lot of people is very controversial because obviously paedophilia is not something that in the Western world we consider as morally right. We think it's very sinful. We think these people are the scum of the earth. So this is a book that a lot of people read and just cannot stomach. They find it very uncomfortable because he ends up lodging in America with a woman who has a small child called Lolita, and he eventually kind of grooms her and starts a relationship with her. Now, I understand that that is really controversial content, and I know a lot of people will be infuriated that I've given it such a high rating. But my justification is that when I went into reading this, I wanted to read it by the merit of the classic with which it is regarded and still stands. So I didn't ignore the content, and some of the more disturbing content was indeed disturbing to read. However, I really wanted to read it as its own merit of literature. I think that Nabokov is a very intelligent man. The way that he phrases things, he's got beautiful command of the English language, considering English isn't his first language. He's very eloquent with what he says. He uses a lot of French in this novel, casual French in conversations, which a lot of it went over my head, and he also uses a lot of references and intertextuality to other literature that I couldn't understand. It wasn't accessible to me because I didn't know about it. However, overall, it is very well written. It is really interesting and fascinating for me because I'm really interested in psychology, about this perspective of this man who has these sinful desires from his own point of view, his self-justification for that, his obsessive nature towards her, and how this unravels him as a character. So I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I found both the characters of Lolita and the main protagonist really interesting. Not that it wasn't disturbing, and I'm not condoning the behaviour or the desires or the thoughts that the main character conveyed within this novel, but I found it really intriguing. I was interested in the psychology and really getting to grips with both of those characters, which you really can in this book. So I wouldn't knock it until you've tried it, is my advice, and if it's really not for you, that's fine. But it was very interesting for me and I really did enjoy reading it. So that's my justification. I'm sorry if that's not good enough for a lot of you, but that's how I felt about Lolita, and that's what I read at the beginning of this month. So the next book that I read was an audio book, so I'm going to put a picture up here, and that is A Study of Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. Now that is the first Sherlock Holmes book. I listened to an audiobook and it was read by Stephen Fry. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It was very much what you expect a Sherlock Holmes book to be. It was written in the style that you see a lot of productions and adaptations of Sherlock to be. He is the same eccentric character. Watson is the same shy, intelligent character. It was really interesting to get a kind of backlog history because with Sherlock I've only watched episodes sporadically of series, and so it was nice to find out how they finally meet and how their relationship happens. So it was thoroughly enjoyable. It didn't rock my world. It didn't tell me anything that I didn't already know, but it's an enjoyable, fast-paced read. Stephen Fry is fantastic on the audiobook, so I would highly recommend that if you have Audible and you want to listen to Sherlock Holmes, definitely do it on the Audible app because Stephen Fry was fantastic in that. I really love his voice and his storytelling. So yeah, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was enjoyable, so I would recommend that. But that was the second book that I read in January. And then the third book that I read in January was The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. Now this is a collection of poetry, and this is Rupi Kaur's second collection, so she's done Milk and Honey in 2014, and this was her 2017 collection. Now I've never read Milk and Honey, and I decided that I would read this one to figure out whether I like her style of poetry. Now I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars, and there was a few interesting things. I did a little bit of research to find out what the general consensus of this particular work is, because I know that Milk and Honey was quite highly regarded. And I got a whole flurry of different articles and websites and different things about this particular collection and her other one. One thing that I found on a lot of research is that there seems to be a bit of controversiality around the idea that Rupi Kaur has stolen a style and themes and ideas from another poet called Naria Waheed. And I saw a few articles where they compared, and yes, they have similar themes, and yes, they have a similar style because Rupi Kaur does everything in lowercase. But the main overall argument that I got out of it was that in general, women use a lot of very similar imagery about womanhood and feminism. And I think you're allowed a bit of creative license, so it didn't affect my reading of this. I didn't think she'd particularly stolen anything. But the whole point of why I gave it 3 out of 5 stars is I don't think there was anything remotely original in this piece. So she cuts it up into 5 different themes with this one in particular, it's about wilting, falling, rooting, rising and blooming. And in Milk and Honey, apparently she had a very similar layout. And it goes through a whole plethora of different things: feminism, self-hate, then self-love, relationship breakdowns, family breakdowns, heartbreak, and then coming out the other side. A very conventional story in that sense. But she used a whole plethora of ideas and she loosely talked about them. There wasn't any stability to this collection, I didn't feel. And I also felt like she's not telling me or using imagery or anything that I haven't read before in novels and other poetry collections. So I just found this a bit of a dull, damp weed and a damp squib really to read, which is a bit unfortunate because I really expected something better. I think she's great because she's encouraging a new generation of people to be interested in poetry, and I think that's fantastic. But this didn't give me what I wanted, and I think it started to help me expand what I want from poetry. I want poetry to be lyrical, beautiful, to move me, to challenge me, and I think the best statement I can give for this collection is it's rather oversimplistic for me. It reminded me of similar themes that had been used by poets like Maya Angelou, but not as well constructed. So unfortunately it was just a middle of the road read, but if you're interested in trying out poetry, then I would say try with Rupi Kaur, because you don't have to be fully engaged when you read this. You can passively read it like a novel almost and get to grips with a bit of poetry, whereas I think I'm more interested in poetry that's going to really challenge me and make me think. So that is the 3rd book that I read this month. And then the 4th and final book that I read this month was Ali Smith's Autumn. Now I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I wanted to give it 5 stars, but it was kind of near the end of the month that I read this. It's quite hard trudging through it at first because at the beginning, one of the main characters is kind of telling us a dream sequence, so it's very disorientating, and I was really anxious that that was going to be her entire style all the way through, and it's not. She litters really interesting distorted pieces with then very coherent, normal human interaction, and so the peppering and littering of these two contrasts works really well in this book. So Mr. Gluck is one of the main characters. We start the novel with him being in the hospital. He's in this dreamlike state. They think he's near the end. He's about 100 plus years old. So Mr. Gluck started a relationship with Elizabeth, who was his young neighbour. So they started a platonic friendship. It's nothing creepy, you know. After Lolita, you're thinking, oh, any adult male talking to a young woman is weird now. But no. So he starts a relationship with her. He tries to teach her about literature. He becomes like this grandfather figure to her, and it has a massive impact on her. So when he's poorly, she goes to visit him, and it's only towards the end of the novel that we get any sense of his past life and his family life and anything more about him, because we're seeing his dreams and we're hearing her talk about him, we're hearing her talk about her relationship with the mother, and there's some really funny things in here. Ali Smith is very good at doing this sharp Scottish sense of humour. She's very witty. Some of the funniest bits in this book was the character of Elizabeth going to get her passport done, and these funny interactions she has with people from the post office and these really strange things that they say, or how no matter how much she tries, they're not letting her have the passport photo be done. Something's always got to be wrong. And just, it was very, very true to human life. You have some of these encounters in post offices or supermarkets with people, and it was just so cleverly done. She's so good and fantastic at reading people. So it's such an interesting book, and since I've read it, it's really come on board with me. I've really started to understand and appreciate more of what I was reading. I didn't get round to reading Winter, which I told you about, but I kind of didn't expect I would get onto Winter as well in the same month. I'm hoping to get to Winter very soon, but I don't know if I will get round to it in February. I might have a bit of a break so that I can really get to grips with what I've just read and then carry on with the collection, although they're not connected, so it doesn't really matter. So that's everything. I know I mentioned in my January TBR about Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me as well, and I'm currently reading that now, but I didn't get round to it in January, so when you see my February TBR, it will be there, and I'll explain all the other books that I'm going to be reading for that. If you'd like to be notified when my February TBR video is coming out, then please hit the subscribe button, and then you can get direct alert when it is uploaded. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!